Let me ask you something. What would you do if you found out that the organization you trusted, the one that told you what to wear, what to study, who to marry, and whether or not to go to college, quietly changed some of its most fundamental rules, without ever admitting they were wrong in the first place? No apology, no admission of error, just a soft announcement. A policy update buried inside a meeting outline or a new publication. And millions of people around the world, people who had been punished, shunned, or spiritually humiliated for breaking those very same rules, were left to figure that out on their own. That is exactly what has been happening inside the Watchtower Society, the organization that runs Jehovah's Witnesses. And today, we are going to document it, change by change, year by year. We have 7 of them. 7 shifts, reversals, and quiet U-turns that the governing body either downplayed, reframed, or simply never properly explained to the people most affected by them. Some of these will surprise you, some will make you angry, and the seventh one, is the one they have been trying to avoid talking about the most. So make sure you stay until the end, because number 7 is where this entire story comes together. Before we get into it, if you are new here, welcome. This channel is about accountability, truth, and asking the questions that powerful institutions do not want asked. If that is why you are here, hit subscribe right now so you never miss an investigation like this one. And if this video opens your eyes the way I think it will, drop a like before you leave. It genuinely helps more people find this content. Now, let's get into it. The governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses is a small group of men, currently around 8 to 10, who operate from the organization's world headquarters in Warwick, New York. They describe themselves as God's sole channel of communication on earth today. That is not an exaggeration or an interpretation. That is their own language from their own publications. For ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses, called publishers, every major life decision flows through this body's guidance. Career choices, medical decisions, relationships, dress codes, social media use, who you can eat with, and critically, whether you can speak to your own children or parents if they leave the faith. When the governing body says something is spiritually dangerous, it becomes spiritually dangerous. When they say something is a matter of personal conscience, it becomes a matter of personal conscience. The theological category a topic lands in determines whether a witness faces any consequences for their choice, which is why the changes we are about to document are so significant. Because in every single case, these are things that were once firmly in the spiritually dangerous category, enforced through social pressure, congregation privilege removal, or outright shunning, that have now, quietly, been reclassified. Not because of new scripture, not because God's word changed, but because the men in Warwick changed their minds. And here is the phrase they use every single time that happens. Remember it. You are going to hear it a lot today. The light gets brighter. It comes from a verse in Proverbs. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, growing brighter until full day. The organization uses it to explain doctrinal reversals without ever using the word mistake. The light was dim before, now it is brighter. Nobody was wrong. God just revealed more. Keep that phrase in mind, because by the time we reach number 7, you are going to understand exactly what it costs the people who lived under the darker light. Change. Number 1. The hour count. The clock of Jehovah is gone. For most of its modern history, every Jehovah's Witness was required to fill out a monthly field service report. The form was simple, but the weight it carried was enormous. You recorded the number of hours you spent preaching that month, the number of Bible studies you conducted, the amount of literature you placed. This was not optional. It was not suggested. It was the primary metric by which a person's spiritual health was evaluated by the congregation. Elders reviewed these reports. Patterns were noted. People who submitted low hours were counseled. People who submitted no hours were marked, officially categorized as irregular or inactive publishers. The social consequences of that categorization were real. You could lose congregation responsibilities. You could be viewed with quiet suspicion. In high-control environments, your standing in the group, and therefore your access to relationships, social support, and community, depended in part on how many hours you reported. And then, in late 2023, after decades of this system, the governing body announced it was being eliminated for regular publishers. Ordinary members no longer needed to count and report their hours. The new system only required them to indicate, with a simple yes or no, whether they had participated in ministry that month. The explanation given was gracious and pastoral. It was about heart motivation, not numbers. God knows the heart. The important thing is the desire to share, not the quantity logged. And that sounds beautiful. Until you ask the obvious question. If ours were never the true measure of spirituality, if it was always about the heart, then what exactly were we doing for the last 50 years? Why were people counseled for low hours? Why were pioneers celebrated for high hours? Why was the hour report the single most consistent piece of data the organization collected on every member, globally, for decades? The hour report system was not just a bureaucratic tool, it was a control mechanism. It created quantifiable, comparable, reportable obedience. And now, it is gone. And no one who was shamed by it, no one who felt like a spiritual failure because of a number on a slip of paper, ever received an acknowledgement that the measurement itself was the problem. Change number 2, the beard. 50 years of no beard. Now it's fine. This one might sound small. It is not small. For the better part of 5 decades, wearing a beard as a Jehovah's Witness male, particularly in Western countries, was effectively prohibited if you wanted any role or privilege in the congregation. Ministerial servants, elders, Bethel workers, those who gave talks or handled the microphones, beards were disqualifying. The expectation was clean-shaven, every time. The reasoning given was about perception. Witnesses wanted to look respectable and distinct from the world. In the 1960s and 70s, beards were associated with countercultural rebellion. The organization decided this made beards spiritually problematic, and that decision calcified into policy that outlasted the cultural moment that created it by decades. Men were told, explicitly, that if they wanted to serve God fully and have congregation responsibilities, they needed to shave. Brothers who refused to shave were quietly sidelined. Some who moved to new congregations were denied privileges until they shaved. The pressure was consistent and documented. Then, in an announcement that rippled through congregations globally, the governing body acknowledged that there is no biblical basis for prohibiting beards. It is, they said, a personal decision, a matter of grooming and personal taste, as long as the beard is well kept. Again, the announcement is reasonable. It is the right call. Beards are clearly not a moral issue. But think about the men who were told they could not fully serve God with facial hair. Think about the ones who shaved for decades, not because they wanted to, but because the alternative was exclusion. Think about the young men who were denied ministerial positions because of it. Not one of those men received an apology. Not one elder who enforced that standard was asked to acknowledge that the rule was wrong. The light got brighter. That is all. Move on. Change. Number 3. Dress code. Women in pants. Men without ties. The suit era is quietly ending. The image of Jehovah's Witnesses at the door has been remarkably consistent for generations. Suit and tie for the brothers, dress or skirt for the sisters. Hair neat, presentation immaculate. The look was deliberate, coded, and non-negotiable. In 2024 and into 2025, the organization began quietly relaxing those expectations. Sisters were told they could wear modest trousers or slacks to meetings and in field ministry. Brothers were informed that ties and jackets would no longer be required in all circumstances, particularly in informal or warm weather ministry settings. The official framing emphasized biblical principles of modesty rather than specific clothing rules, focusing on the spirit of the standard rather than the letter. On the surface, this is progress. It is a reasonable acknowledgement that clothing standards are culturally relative and that forcing people into formal Western dress codes is not actually a theological requirement. But beneath the surface, consider what this change accomplishes. The hyper-formal appearance of witnesses, the suits, the ties, the coordinated presentation, was one of the visual markers that made them identifiable as a high-demand religious group. It created a visual boundary between members and the broader world. It signaled total commitment and conformity. Relaxing it makes the organization look less like a sect and more like a mainstream church. It reduces the visual friction that might cause someone to research the group more carefully before inviting them inside. It smooths the path to recruitment. So when the governing body says the change is about modesty principles, ask yourself, why now? Why after a century of enforced formal dress? What changed in the Bible? Nothing. What changed in the world? The optics of strict religious control became a liability. The dress code changed when the dress code became a problem for growth. Change. Number 4. Greeting the disfellowshipped. This is where the stakes get serious. Because this change is not just about manners. It is about families. It is about parents and children who have not spoken for years. About the practice of shunning, one of the most psychologically devastating enforcement mechanisms in any religious organization. Jehovah's Witnesses who are disfellowshipped, formally removed from the congregation for doctrinal or behavioral violations, face what the organization calls no association from other members. This includes, in practice, their own families. Spouses who remain in the organization are expected to minimize contact. Parents are expected to limit communication with disfellowshipped adult children. Children in the faith are taught not to associate with a disfellowshipped sibling. The psychological damage this causes is well documented. Former members describe it as a form of social death. The threat of losing every relationship you have built inside the organization, family, friends, your entire community, is one of the primary mechanisms that keeps people from leaving or questioning. In 2023, the governing body announced a modification. Members could now offer a brief, basic greeting to a disfellowshipped person who attended a Kingdom Hall meeting. A hello, a good morning, presented as an act of mercy, a gentle gesture of welcome to encourage the person to return. This is the change they announced. Here is the change they did not announce. Norway had been investigating the Watchtower organization for years over its shunning practices. European human rights frameworks had increasingly scrutinized the policy. Norway ultimately stripped the organization of its state funding tied to religious community subsidies, citing shunning as a violation of members' freedom of religion and freedom of association. Other countries were watching. Legal pressure was mounting. And within this context, not out of genuine pastoral compassion, not because of new scriptural insight, the governing body announced a softening. Not an end to shunning, a greeting. You can say hello. That is the mercy being offered to families that have been destroyed. The light did not get brighter here. The lawyers got nervous. Change. 5. Higher education. For generations, the Watchtower organization strongly, consistently, and repeatedly warned its members against pursuing higher education. College was portrayed as a spiritual danger zone, a place where young witnesses would be exposed to worldly thinking, evolution, materialism, and peer pressure that would erode their faith. Specific publications discouraged pursuing university degrees. Young people were counseled to consider pioneer ministry or Bethel service instead of academic careers. The social pressure inside congregations against attending college was significant. Parents who encouraged their children toward university were sometimes viewed as putting worldly ambition ahead of spiritual priorities. The practical consequences were enormous. Generations of witness young people entered adulthood without the educational credentials that could have opened doors to financial stability, professional fulfillment, and independence. And for many of them, that dependency, economic as well as social, made it harder to leave the organization if they began to have doubts. In recent years, the tone has shifted. Higher education is increasingly framed as a personal and family decision. The emphasis now is on balance, on pursuing education in a way that supports the family without crowding out spiritual activities. The warnings are softer. The condemnation is gone. Here is what is also true. The Watchtower organization is a global operation. It has legal teams, accounting departments, information technology infrastructure, construction projects, media production, and international logistics. It needs professionals. It needs people with degrees. The organization does not publicize this, but it actively recruits members with professional qualifications for its Bethel facilities and legal operations. The same institution that told a generation of young people that college was spiritually dangerous now benefits from the professionals produced by the colleges it once warned them away from, typically those from outside the faith. The policy softened not because Scripture changed, but because the organization's operational needs changed. And the millions of witnesses who were steered away from higher education in the decades when it was dangerous, they do not get those years back. Change. Nurker 6. Blood fractions and medical choices. A doctrine that has already cost thousands of lives still being adjusted. The blood doctrine is one of the most serious and consequential teachings in Watchtower history. Based on an interpretation of Acts 15 and other scriptures, the organization has long prohibited members from accepting whole blood transfusions, even in life-threatening medical emergencies. Members carry hospital liaison cards expressing their refusal. Children have died. Adults have died. Parents have watched their children die rather than accept treatment that could have saved them. Over the decades, the organization has made incremental adjustments to what is and is not permitted under this doctrine. Certain blood fractions, components extracted from whole blood, were eventually reclassified as matters of personal conscience, then others. Each reclassification was presented as new spiritual understanding. Each one quietly expanded what members were allowed to accept medically. The process of these adjustments is deeply troubling when you examine it closely, because if the restriction on blood fractions was wrong, if it was too strict, if it denied members access to legitimate medical treatment unnecessarily, then every death that occurred under that stricter rule was not a faithful sacrifice. It was an avoidable tragedy caused by incorrect doctrine. The organization has never framed it that way. Each adjustment is presented as progress, the light getting brighter, rather than a correction of a deadly error. The theological framework remains. The authority of the governing body to define what medical treatments are permissible remains. And members today still navigate a complex set of allowances and prohibitions that vary by fraction, procedure, and personal interpretation, in medical emergencies, under extreme stress, often without full information. This is not a closed chapter. It is an ongoing situation. And the adjustments that have already been made tell you something critical about the stability of the doctrine that is still in place. Change number 7. The authority claim itself. Everything we have discussed today, the hours, the beard, the dress code, the shunning, the education, the blood, all of it flows from a single source, a single claim, the governing body's claim to be the faithful and discreet slave described in Matthew 24:45. The sole channel through which God communicates with humanity today. The group of men to whom they say, you owe spiritual obedience, because opposing their direction is not opposing them, but opposing God. That claim is the foundation of everything. Without it, none of the rules carry divine authority. Without it, changing a rule is just a group of men changing their minds. With it, changing a rule is God revealing new light. The claim transforms human error into theological progress. It insulates the leadership from accountability. It makes questioning them spiritually dangerous. Here is what most people do not know. In 2012, at a major international convention, the governing body quietly but significantly revised the definition of who the faithful and discreet slave actually is. For most of the organization's history, this title was understood to refer to the entire anointed class, the roughly 144,000 who have a heavenly hope. All of them, collectively, were considered the channel. In 2012, the teaching was changed. The faithful and discreet slave now refers specifically and exclusively to the governing body, the small group of men in Warwick, not thousands of anointed members worldwide, just them. The authority that had been distributed across a large symbolic class was consolidated into the hands of fewer than a dozen people. This was presented as, you know this already, new light, increased understanding. But think about what actually happened. A group of men rewrote the doctrine that grants them authority in a way that increased their authority. They decided they had more power than previously understood. And they made that announcement themselves. No external check, no outside review, no accountability to the membership they govern. And then consider the pattern we have watched today. Every change, the hours, the beard, the education, was driven by something. Social pressure, legal scrutiny, operational necessity, cultural optics. In every case, the doctrine adjusted to serve the institution, and the institution's authority to make that adjustment was never questioned because the institution is also the entity that defines its own authority. This is the loop. This is the mechanism. This is what makes everything else possible. The governing body has never said, we were wrong. They have said, the light got brighter. But for the people who lived under the dim light, the ones who lost careers, relationships, family members, years of their lives to rules that were later revised, the difference between those two phrases is everything. If the light got brighter, they were faithful servants doing their best with limited understanding, and there is nothing to apologize for. If they were wrong, then those people deserved better. They deserved honesty. They deserved an acknowledgement that human authority was being exercised and human authority is fallible. The seventh change, the one they will never announce, the one that does not get a softly worded update in a meeting outline, is the change to honestly examine the foundation of the authority claim itself. That change has not happened. And until it does, every other change is just rearranging the furniture inside a structure built on a claim that cannot withstand scrutiny. I want to be clear about something before we close. The people inside this organization, the publishers, the pioneers, the elders, the families, most of them are not the problem. Most of them are genuinely trying to live good lives according to what they have been taught. They deserve respect. They deserve compassion. This is not about them. This is about an institution that claims divine authority and uses that claim to demand obedience, enforce compliance, and resist accountability, and then quietly adjusts its own rules when the external pressure becomes strong enough, without ever acknowledging the human cost of the rules it discards. The pattern is consistent. The mechanism is the same every time. And the phrase, "the light gets brighter," has done more work in that organization than perhaps any other sentence in its history, because it turns correction into progress, error into revelation, and accountability into irrelevance. If you are a current witness watching this, I am not asking you to leave your faith. I am asking you to think. Ask why the doctrine that grants authority was defined by the people it benefits. Ask who benefits when shunning is adjusted, and whether it is the families or the legal department. Ask why college went from spiritually dangerous to personally acceptable, and trace the timeline of when the organization's need for professionals increased. Ask, because the one thing a genuine faith that has nothing to hide should welcome is honest questions. If you are a former member watching this, I see you. The years you gave to those rules mattered. Your grief about what you lost is legitimate, and you were not naive for trusting. You were human, inside a system designed to make trust the only option. And if you are watching this for the first time with no personal connection to this organization, please share this with someone who might need it. Research before recruiting, questions before commitments, truth before authority. That is the investigation. 7 changes. 1 pattern. 1 question they are not answering. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Are you a current witness, a former member, or someone who found this from the outside? Tell me what changed your thinking, or what question you still have. I read every single comment on this channel, and I respond to as many as I can. If this video was worth your time, please share it. 1 share can put this in front of someone who needs it. And if you are not subscribed yet, there is a button right there. Hit it, because we are not done. Not even close. I will see you in the next one.